The courtroom was electric, humming with the kind of tension that only history-making trials can summon. Bright flashes from photographers painted the marble walls in bursts of white. Reporters jostled for space along the aisles, and every whispered prediction seemed to vanish under the weight of anticipation. This wasn't just another legal proceeding. It was a spectacle, and everyone knew it. Melania Trump entered first, her legal team marching at her side with the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Their expressions were rehearsed, polished into smug certainty. And then there was Donald Trump, seated in the front row, his familiar smirk plastered across his face like a trophy. He leaned back, chin raised, whispering jokes to those around him as though the entire event were just another episode of reality television. The message was clear. Victory was inevitable, humiliation of their opponent preordained. But across the aisle stood Jasmine Crockett, steady and composed, her eyes fixed not on the performance of wealth and entitlement, but on the truth she had come to deliver. Her presence seemed almost understated, but there was a quiet gravity about her that drew the gaze of the room. She wasn't there for spectacle. She was there for justice. Then came the moment that would define everything. Melania's legal team called forth their star witness, the one they had promised would crush Crockett's case and secure a headline victory. The witness took the stand, confident, rehearsed, ready to deliver a fatal blow. Reporters scribbled, faster, cameras zoomed in, the air thick with expectation. And that's when Jasmine Crockett rose. With calm precision, she approached the stand, her footsteps echoing against the chamber's stone floor. The room hushed. Her voice, firm but measured, cut through the silence as she asked her first question. Then a second. Then a third. 9 seconds. That's all it took. In 9 seconds, the star witness faltered, contradicted themselves, and in a stunning collapse, unraveled the case that Melania's team had built with such smug assurance. Gasps rippled across the courtroom, pens dropped, jaws fell open. Even Trump's smirk wavered, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. And in that instant, the air shifted. What began as a display of power had just turned into the opening act of humiliation. Because what Jasmine Crockett had unleashed in those 9 seconds was only the beginning. And the real storm was still to come. The gasps that echoed through the courtroom after the witness crumbled weren't just about one slip of the tongue. They were about what this trial represented, something far larger than Melania Trump, Jasmine Crockett, or even the spectacle of a 9-second collapse. This was about whether America still believed in accountability, or whether wealth, power, and celebrity could bend the law into a shield for the privileged. For Melania, the lawsuit was never simply about justice. It was a performance of power. By hauling Jasmine Crockett into court, she wasn't just seeking legal remedy. She was sending a message. The message was clear. Those who challenged the Trump dynasty, those who dared to question the stories carefully constructed around its name, would be met with intimidation cloaked in courtroom procedure. Her designer suits, her legal army, the smug confidence radiating from the front row. It was all theater designed to remind the public that status and money could still dictate who belonged at the top. And there, across from it all, stood Jasmine Crockett. She didn't arrive with the fanfare of photographers desperate to capture her outfit, nor with a retinue of lawyers eager to shield her. She walked into the courtroom carrying only the weight of truth and the resilience of someone who understood what it meant to fight uphill battles. To her, this wasn't just about defending herself. It was about standing up for every ordinary person who had ever been bullied by power, silenced by money, or cornered by privilege. The divide could not have been sharper. On one side, Melania Trump projecting elegance as armor, leaning on privilege as a weapon. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, a voice for working families, immigrants, and everyday Americans who believed the law should protect them, not punish them. The trial had become a collision of values. and those values carried enormous stakes. If Melania's lawsuit succeeded, it would signal that intimidation still worked, that privilege could silence even elected officials sworn to speak truth to power. It would tell ordinary citizens that justice was a luxury reserved for the wealthy, that truth could be smothered under piles of paperwork and smug grins. But if Jasmine Crockett prevailed, the meaning would ripple far beyond the courtroom. It would stand as proof that arrogance could falter, that truth could pierce through privilege, that dignity was not just a defense, but a weapon of its own. It would remind Americans that no amount of wealth or celebrity could rewrite reality when someone had the courage to speak plainly and without fear. The audience in that courtroom wasn't just a collection of reporters and curious citizens. They were witnesses to a test of America's soul. Could the daughter of privilege bend the system to her will, or would a congresswoman grounded in the struggles of real people expose the fragility behind that facade? Every pause, every objection, every question carried the weight of this greater battle. And as the cameras rolled and the world watched, it became clear. This wasn't about one lawsuit. It was about whether America itself would side with spectacle or with substance. But just when the courtroom seemed to settle into the rhythm of a conventional trial, something unexpected jolted everyone back to the edge of their seats, because what happened next left the entire courtroom stunned. To understand why Melania Trump marched into that courtroom with such quiet arrogance, you have to look at the story she built for herself, the polished image, the contradictions beneath it, and the power dynamics she inherited by marrying into one of America's most polarizing dynasties. For decades, Melania has been framed in public as a figure of elegance. The fashion spreads, the gowns, the choreographed appearances at state dinners and global summits. She became the embodiment of luxury, a woman whose silence was often mistaken for sophistication. To her admirers, she was poised, untouchable, a symbol of high society. To her critics, she was aloof, detached, a shadow who said little while chaos erupted around her. But what lay beneath the designer veneer was a series of contradictions. Here was a woman whose very life was a testament to the immigrant story, arriving in America from Slovenia, pursuing opportunity, carving out a space for herself. And yet, once she ascended to the gilded Trump Tower, her story was carefully pruned and reframed, her immigrant journey often ignored or minimized by the very family that vilified immigrants as political sport. She became both proof of the American dream and a silent participant in the effort to weaponize that dream against others. Her connection to Donald Trump's empire shaped more than just her public image. It shaped her playbook. For Trump, lawsuits were never simply about law. They were tools, blunt instruments used to silence critics, intimidate adversaries, or stall accountability. He sued journalists, contractors, political rivals, even family members. In Trump's world, the courtroom was not a place for truth, but a stage for power, where money could smother facts and drag opponents into exhaustion. And so, when Melania turned her sights on Jasmine Crockett, it was not about righting a wrong. It was about intimidation. It was about flexing the same muscle her husband had flexed countless times before. Show them you can afford to fight, even if the fight is hollow. Her legal team's smugness, Trump's smirk from the front row, these were not signs of confidence in justice. They were signals of confidence in spectacle. But the arrogance masked fragility. Melania's carefully cultivated image had always been precarious. Her time as First Lady had been marred by controversies. Her "I really don't care, do you" jacket. Her reputation for detachment during national crises. Her absence from initiatives that demanded authenticity and empathy. Her efforts to brand herself as above the fray often collapsed under the weight of public skepticism. Each attempt at control seemed to reveal more cracks. And now, by suing Jasmine Crockett, she exposed herself to a different kind of scrutiny, one she could not choreograph, one she could not mute with silence. In the courtroom, she was not on a magazine cover or a carefully curated stage. She was under oath, under question, vulnerable to contradictions, and contradictions had always been her weakness. The irony was heavy. An immigrant woman weaponizing privilege against a congresswoman who represented the very communities Melania's own story should have uplifted. In trying to silence Crockett, she betrayed the essence of her own beginnings. It wasn't about defending dignity. It was about shielding power. Observers could sense it. Beneath the diamonds, beneath the elegance, beneath the whispered threats of legal action, there was fragility. Melania's power didn't come from her own voice. It came from proximity to her husband's brand of intimidation, and like him, she mistook fear for respect, spectacle for strength. But the courtroom has a way of stripping away facades. Under cross-examination, under the pressure of truth, the carefully crafted image can collapse in seconds. Just as Trump's bluster has so often revealed insecurity, Melania's silence, once considered dignified, now risked being seen as emptiness. The lawsuit, designed to project strength, instead foreshadowed humiliation. Because lawsuits can drag on, money can buy time, and image can distract for a season. But when arrogance is exposed to truth, when privilege is forced to stand unshielded in the light, the collapse comes swiftly. And Jasmine Crockett, with her sharp questions and unflinching calm, was about to reveal just how fragile Melania's fortress of privilege really was. What had been presented as an untouchable icon of elegance was about to be remembered instead as the woman who set the stage for her own downfall. Long before Jasmine, Crockett stood in a courtroom across from Melania Trump. She stood in classrooms, neighborhoods, and courtrooms of a very different kind, where power was scarce, money scarcer, and the stakes for ordinary people were always high. Her journey wasn't polished with gold-plated handrails or designer gowns. It was paved with late nights, tight budgets, and the unshakable determination to fight for people who rarely had a voice. Crockett's roots were in working-class soil. She grew up seeing families stretch paychecks, parents taking double shifts, and children translating for immigrant parents at grocery stores, banks, and hospitals. These weren't abstract statistics to her. They were faces she knew, classmates she sat beside, neighbors she grew up with. From an early age, she understood that the deck was stacked against ordinary people, not because they lacked ambition, but because power was hoarded by those who thought wealth equaled entitlement. Her education became her ladder, but every rung was climbed with sacrifice. Unlike those who could coast on privilege, Crockett studied under the hum of part-time jobs, loans looming over her shoulder. Law school wasn't just a pursuit of prestige. It was a weapon she intended to wield. She didn't dream of joining a high-rise firm or chasing six-figure bonuses. She dreamed of defending people who were crushed by a system designed to ignore them. And so after becoming an attorney, Crockett didn't retreat into comfort. She went where the work was hardest, representing indigent clients, young people, caught in cycles of poverty, families fighting eviction, and workers cheated of wages. She sat across from people who trembled when they entered courtrooms, who feared the law instead of trusting it. She fought case after case not for fame, but for survival, for theirs, and sometimes even for her own, as she scraped to keep her practice afloat. These experiences etched into her a sense of clarity. She learned that arrogance in power always looked the same. Landlords who thought tenants had no recourse, corporations that believed workers couldn't fight back, officials who banked on intimidation. And now, in Melania Trump, she saw the same pattern. Privilege wielded like a weapon, lawsuits as tools of silence. It was a dynamic Crockett knew intimately, and she had spent her entire career preparing to dismantle it. Her rise to Congress was not the product of celebrity or inherited wealth. It was the product of grit and fearlessness. She spoke in the language of lived experience, never mincing words when calling out hypocrisy, never softening her tone when the truth demanded sharpness. In the halls of Congress, her reputation grew as a truth-teller, someone who didn't perform politeness for the sake of decorum, but who spoke in ways that cut through noise and reached people who felt unseen. Crockett's style wasn't about theatrics, but it carried drama because it carried truth. She was the daughter of working families, the advocate for the overlooked, the voice who reminded America that power should answer to people, not the other way around. When she grilled witnesses in hearings or sparred with colleagues who underestimated her, she did so with the authority of someone who had lived the consequences of injustice, not just studied them. This was what made her confrontation with Melania Trump so resonant. Crockett's story paralleled in many ways the immigrant story Melania herself embodied, but had chosen to weaponize. Crockett knew families who had crossed oceans with little more than hope. She knew children who carried the weight of their parents' sacrifices, and she knew the sting of hearing those sacrifices mocked or dismissed. For Crockett, this trial wasn't just about defending herself. It was about defending every immigrant, every worker, every family who had ever been told that their truth didn't matter. Her empathy was her armor, her sharpness was her weapon, and her background uniquely prepared her for this exact battle. Where Melania carried privilege like a shield, Crockett carried resilience like a flame. Where Melania leaned on image, Crockett leaned on integrity. Where Melania sought to intimidate, Crockett sought to reveal. As she sat in that courtroom calmly waiting her turn, Crockett wasn't intimidated by the spectacle of wealth or the presence of Trump's smirk in the front row. She had faced tougher rooms where her clients had nothing, where her opponents had everything, and where the only thing standing between injustice and justice was her willingness to fight. And so, when the moment came to face down Melania's arrogance, Crockett was ready. Her life had been preparation for this very stage. Every sacrifice, every struggle, every fight for people without power had honed her into someone who could not be rattled by wealth or undone by spectacle. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just walk into that courtroom to win a case. She walked in carrying the weight of ordinary people, the echoes of immigrant families, and the unshakable belief that dignity belongs to everyone. And that belief, sharpened by a lifetime of battles, was about to collide with the arrogance sitting across from her. The courtroom felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a high-stakes arena, the kind where reputation and dignity were on trial just as much as evidence. On one side, Melania Trump's legal team strutted with the confidence of those convinced money and name recognition guaranteed victory. Their voices dripped with condescension, their objections calculated not to clarify but to undermine. And, in the front row, Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, lips curled into that familiar smirk, his eyes darting between his wife's attorneys and Jasmine Crockett, as if waiting for her to stumble. But Crockett didn't stumble. She sharpened. Each time Melania's lawyers attempted to cut her down, questioning her experience, belittling her approach, she answered not with anger, but with precision. When they called her arguments politically motivated, she countered with crisp facts. When they suggested she lacked credibility, she pulled from her years of community law practice, detailing cases where real people's lives had hung in the balance. Her words weren't dramatic flourishes, they were daggers, clean and deliberate. The more she spoke, the more the rhythm of the courtroom shifted. Reporters who had come expecting a polished spectacle began scribbling faster, recognizing that something deeper was unfolding. The audience leaned forward, hanging on Crockett's tone, controlled but piercing, never losing composure, never letting the opposition rattle her. Melania herself, at first calm and poised, began to reveal cracks. Her hands fidgeted with a silk scarf draped across her lap. She whispered to her attorneys more frequently, eyes darting toward the cameras that seemed to capture every falter. Each time Crockett landed a question that cut through the facade, Melania's jaw tightened just slightly. The mask of elegance, straining under the weight of pressure. The exchanges grew sharper. Crockett leaned on her strength, clarity, and refused to bend under the team's theatrics. They tried to drown her in technicalities. She answered with simplicity that anyone in the gallery could understand. They tried to corner her with convoluted arguments. She walked the jury and judge back to the heart of the matter with plain language. For every sneer, Crockett had a fact. For every smirk, she had a truth. And slowly the courtroom began to sense it. The intimidation strategy wasn't working. The arrogance that Melania's team carried into the room was unraveling in real time. Even Trump's smirk began to fade as his arms folded tighter across his chest. What was supposed to be an easy display of dominance had turned into a showcase of dignity under fire. And no one embodied that better than Jasmine Crockett, standing steady, her voice unwavering. By the time the mid-afternoon session arrived, tension had grown unbearable. The air was thick with anticipation, each side waiting for the moment that would tip the scales. Melania's attorneys prepared their star witness, the one they insisted would bury Crockett's case once and for all. They exchanged smug looks, straightened their ties, and leaned forward with the kind of confidence only people convinced of their own inevitability can muster. But Crockett's eyes didn't flinch. She adjusted her notes, stood tall, and looked directly at the witness as they prepared to take the stand. The room fell silent, cameras zoomed in, pens hovered over notepads. And then Crockett turned to the witness that Melania's team swore would destroy her. The witness walked to the stand with the kind of swagger that only comes from being told you're the ace in the hole. Melania's legal team straightened their jackets, exchanging sly smiles, already envisioning headlines declaring their triumph. Cameras zoomed in, pens poised, as though the next few minutes would decide the entire trial. And they would. But not in the way Melania imagined. Jasmine Crockett rose slowly, gathering her notes with deliberate care. She didn't rush. She didn't bark. She moved with the precision of someone who knew the power of timing. The courtroom hushed, the sound of her heels against the polished floor echoing like a drum roll. When she reached the podium, she glanced at the witness, then at the jury, then back at the witness again. Her silence stretched, commanding attention, without a single word. Then came the first question. Simple, almost disarmingly so. Did you or did you not provide the statement under oath that you were present during the events you've described? The witness answered quickly, confidently. Yes, I did. Crockett nodded, as if inviting the jury to take note. Then she asked her second question. And in that statement you swore that every detail was accurate to the best of your knowledge, correct? Of course. Another nod. No dramatics, just control. She leaned slightly forward for her third question. So help me understand why, in your interview just 2 weeks ago, you stated under penalty of perjury that you were not present at that time, in that place. The words hit like a thunderclap. The courtroom gasped in unison, as though the air had been sucked out of the room. The witness blinked, their confidence suddenly faltering. I may have misspoken. No, Crockett interrupted, her tone sharp but calm, her timing surgical. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. You said it under oath. 2 different accounts, 2 different truths. Which one are we supposed to believe? The silence was deafening. The jury leaned in, their pens frozen mid-note. Reporters scrambled to capture the contradiction. And Donald Trump, once grinning smugly in the front row, sat upright, his expression hardening, his smirk erased. It had taken 9 seconds. 9 seconds for the star witness to unravel. Crockett let the silence do the work. She didn't fill it with unnecessary words. She simply stared, unwavering, as the witness squirmed under the weight of their own contradiction. The judge shifted uncomfortably. Melania's lawyers objected, but the objection was hollow. The damage had already been done. The murmurs began, low at first, then rising. Gasps, whispers, even stifled laughter rippled through the courtroom. What was supposed to be the crowning moment of Melania's case had collapsed before it had even begun. The carefully choreographed display of privilege had turned into a public unraveling. Crockett stepped closer, her voice steady as ever. "You. See, ladies and gentlemen," she said, turning toward the jury without breaking her gaze from the witness. "Truth doesn't bend. It doesn't shift depending on who pays for the lawyer or how many cameras are in the room. Truth doesn't need polish. It just needs light." The jury nodded, some even scribbling furiously, as though wanting to remember every word. Melania shifted in her seat, whispering sharply to her attorneys. Her once stoic expression had cracked, her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers tightening around the arm of her chair. The camera caught her glance toward Trump, who shook his head, jaw clenched, but Crockett wasn't done. She leaned back slightly, closing her folder of notes as if to signal she didn't need them. Then she delivered the line that would be replayed on every news broadcast, every TikTok, every late-night comedy monologue for weeks to come. "Your Honor," she said, her voice rising just enough to echo through the chamber, "the only thing that collapsed faster than this testimony is the credibility of the case built upon it." The courtroom erupted. Laughter, cheers, murmurs of astonishment filled the air. The judge banged the gavel for order, but the electricity was unstoppable. Trump threw up his hands, muttering angrily to those beside him. Melania's attorneys shuffled papers in frantic disarray, their earlier confidence reduced to visible panic. And Jasmine Crockett? She simply stood there, calm and unshaken, her presence a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around her. The storm raged, but she was the eye, steady, dignified, victorious. The press gallery exploded into motion. Headlines practically wrote themselves. Crockett crushes Trump team in 9 seconds. Star witness implodes. Privilege meets its match. Clips of the moment began circulating instantly, reporters whispering to their editors that history had just been made. But perhaps the most powerful reactions weren't in the press gallery. They came from the ordinary people watching at home. Immigrant families saw in Crockett's calm the defense of their own dignity. Young women saw strength wrapped in composure, proof that power didn't have to roar to be devastating. And communities long silenced by wealth and privilege felt a surge of validation. The truth could still win, even against the biggest names and deepest pockets. The courtroom slowly regained order, but the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. What began as Melania's attempt to intimidate had become a showcase of her fragility. Her star witness, once touted as invincible, was now the symbol of collapse. And standing in the wreckage was Jasmine Crockett, composed and unbowed, embodying the very dignity her opponents had tried to erase. The trial wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the air had changed. Reporters knew it, jurors sensed it, and even Trump, stone-faced now, his arms crossed tightly, recognized it. The momentum had turned. And as Crockett returned to her seat, the faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. Not smug, not arrogant, but the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just reminded the world what it looks like when truth stands tall. The clash wasn't finished. The shockwaves were only beginning to spread, and soon the entire nation would feel them. By the time the gavel came down to adjourn for the day, the trial had already leapt from courtroom drama to cultural phenomenon. The clip of Jasmine Crockett dismantling Melania's star witness in 9 seconds was everywhere, flashing across TV screens, spreading like wildfire through Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, even dominating push notifications on phones across the country. Within minutes, hashtags surged to the top of trending lists. 9-second meltdown, Crockett crushes, Melania humiliated. TikTok creators remixed the exchange with dramatic music, freeze frames, and captions like, "This is how you handle privilege." One viral edit played Crockett's knockout line, "The only thing that collapsed faster than this testimony is the credibility of the case built upon it." over a drumbeat drop, racking up millions of views overnight. News anchors could barely contain their astonishment. On CNN, commentators described the moment as a legal masterclass. On MSNBC, a panel replayed the 9 seconds in slow motion, dissecting Crockett's poise and timing as if she were a championship athlete. Even some conservative outlets couldn't ignore the collapse, begrudgingly admitting that the witness had fumbled catastrophically. The Chicago Tribune ran a headline the next morning: Crockett's precision strikes shake Trump camp. Celebrities jumped in almost immediately. Musicians tweeted their admiration. Actors posted clips with captions like "Queen Energy," and athletes described the takedown as better than any highlight reel. Comedians, meanwhile, had a field day. A late-night host quipped, "Trump promised us a star witness. Instead, we got a shooting star, bright for 9 seconds, then gone forever." But it wasn't just pundits and celebrities who made the moment resonate. It was ordinary people posting from living rooms, classrooms, and workplaces who transformed it into something bigger. In Charlotte, North Carolina, an immigrant family filmed themselves cheering as Crockett delivered her knockout line, the father saying in Spanish, "She spoke for us tonight." In Chicago, a teacher played the clip for her civics class, telling her students, "This is what accountability looks like." Across the country, community leaders like Ruth Miller shared the video with messages about dignity prevailing over arrogance. Politicians couldn't stay silent either. Progressive leaders like Zohran Mamdani praised Crockett's clarity, contrasting it with the Trump family's reliance on intimidation. James Talarico posted that Crockett had given every young person watching a masterclass in courage. Even E. Jean Carroll, who had battled Trump in her own legal fight, wrote in an op-ed that the moment proved arrogance eventually exposes itself, no matter how carefully it's staged. And then came the international ripples. British and French outlets picked up the story, drawing symbolic parallels between the collapse of Melania's case and political instability abroad. Some even mentioned the French government collapses, weaving the courtroom drama into a narrative of global reckonings with power and accountability. Meanwhile, inside Trump world, panic churned. Allies tried to spin the moment, claiming the witness had been confused or misrepresented, but the footage was undeniable. Memes of the witness stammering beside side-by-side clips of Crockett's calm face dominated feeds. One viral caption summed it up brutally: "When privilege meets preparation." Trump himself was reported to be furious, berating staff behind the scenes. Gone was the front-row smirk. In its place was the familiar scowl of a man who sensed the spectacle had turned against him. For a family that built its brand on invincibility, humiliation on live television was the one thing they couldn't spin away. But perhaps the most important shockwaves were invisible. The quiet affirmations happening in households across the country. Young women who had been told to sit down and stay quiet now had a clip to replay when they needed courage. Immigrant families, long treated as bargaining chips in politics, saw dignity defended in real time. Ordinary workers, accustomed to bosses, or landlords who believed power made them untouchable, felt a surge of validation. The trial was far from over, but the narrative had already escaped Melania's control. Crockett's 9-second strike had become more than evidence. It had become a parable, a story retold at dinner tables, shared in classrooms, woven into sermons. And for every person who had ever felt crushed by privilege, it was proof. Sometimes, all it takes is a few seconds of truth to topple an empire of arrogance. But the story didn't end with the laughter and hashtags, because as the world celebrated Crockett's victory, an even deeper question began to emerge. What lesson would America choose to carry forward from this moment? The answer would come in the resolution. A reminder that this trial wasn't just about Melania Trump or Jasmine Crockett. It was about the kind of country America was willing to become. In the days after the courtroom erupted, the footage of Jasmine Crockett dismantling Melania's case continued to circulate. But it wasn't just the drama that stayed with people. It was the meaning behind it. What played out in 9 seconds had crystallized a lesson that America needed to hear, loudly, clearly, and without apology. Because this trial was never only about Melania Trump. It was about privilege, about how the wealthy and powerful so often attempt to bend truth until it serves them. It was about intimidation masquerading as justice. It was about whether America would accept a system where money buys silence, or whether courage, even from one voice, could topple an entire facade. Crockett's calm in the face of arrogance reminded the country of something profound. Dignity is not weakness. For too long, dignity has been painted as passive, quiet, even naive in the brutal world of politics. But Crockett had shown that dignity could be a blade, sharp, steady, unyielding. She hadn't needed to shout, to sneer, or to posture. She had stood her ground with facts, discipline, and conviction, and it had been enough to unravel an empire of intimidation. For immigrant families, her victory carried an especially powerful resonance. Crockett had defended the very values Melania's team tried to weaponize: belonging, sacrifice, resilience. She had reminded America that immigrants aren't punchlines. They are the backbone of its story. By standing up to Melania, Crockett was defending not just herself, but every family that had ever been told their truth didn't matter. For young women, her victory was equally seismic. Here was someone who looked at power, refused to bow, and exposed its fragility without ever raising her voice. She proved that composure was not surrender, that clarity could cut sharper than cruelty. Teachers replayed her cross-examination for their students, parents pointed to her as an example of courage, and activists invoked her as proof that truth, spoken plainly, still has power. And for America as a whole, the trial became a mirror. On one side was Melania Trump, cloaked in luxury, projecting control, but unraveling under pressure. On the other side was Jasmine Crockett, carrying the weight of working-class roots and immigrant stories, yet standing taller than wealth and spectacle combined. The contrast was stark, and it forced the nation to ask, which side do we want to embody? In Crockett's words, truth doesn't need polish. It just needs light. The nation heard more than a courtroom rebuttal. They heard a manifesto for dignity, a reminder that justice, though battered, could still prevail. That power, no matter how wealthy or smug, could still be held to account. The moral was simple but unforgettable. Arrogance fades, but integrity endures. Laughter fades, but service remains. Privilege collapses, but dignity, carried by those who believe in it, will always stand. And that is why this moment mattered, far beyond one lawsuit. Because it told America, in real time, that it still had a choice: to reward arrogance or to lift up dignity, to follow those who sneer or to follow those who serve, to let intimidation silence truth or to let truth shine so brightly that even the deepest pockets can't bury it. But just as the lesson began to sink in, another thought emerged, whispering beneath the applause and hashtags. Would this clarity last? Would America take this as a turning point, or would the spectacle of power soon drown it out again? That unanswered question hung in the air, as heavy as it was hopeful, because the trial wasn't finished, and the story of dignity versus arrogance was far from over. The final act, the choice of the people watching, was still to come. The trial that began as a weapon of intimidation ended as a lesson in humility. Melania Trump had entered the courtroom draped in confidence, backed by privilege, cheered on by her husband's smirk. But in 9 unforgettable seconds, Jasmine Crockett turned that spectacle into rubble. What was meant to be a show of power became a showcase of fragility. Trump's smirk faded. Melania's case collapsed, and America witnessed something it rarely sees in real time: dignity defeating arrogance, calm overpowering chaos, truth silencing intimidation. This story isn't just about a courtroom clash. It's about the kind of country we choose to be. Do we bend to privilege, letting wealth dictate truth? Or do we rise with voices like Crockett's, reminding the world that justice is not for sale? For immigrant families, for working people, for every child told they didn't belong. This was validation. Proof that even against towering privilege, courage can still win. And now, the choice lies with us. We can let this moment pass like another headline, or we can carry it forward, share it, talk about it. Let it become the story we tell about what America still can be when truth takes center stage. If this moment moved you, if it reminded you that dignity lasts longer than arrogance, don't stop here. Subscribe for more stories where truth stands tall, where arrogance is exposed, and where voices like Jasmine Crockett's remind us what real leadership looks like. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter in this ongoing battle between spectacle and substance. Because one trial may be over, but the fight for dignity, justice, and truth will echo long after the cameras fade. And you deserve to be part of it.